Susan Campbell is known on the international stage for her immersive art and sought after globally to teach and lead workshops. Next up, Susan takes us into her creative process.
I travel a lot in my work, and I shoot quite a bit of video out of airplane windows, and I'm quite fascinated by the structure of cities, the geometry of cities, especially American cities. Most of them are based on the grid, and I really enjoy that infinite expanse of light. We're about to ink up a piece of birch plywood, and I select the wood for its inherent properties, the grain, some of the imperfections. Some of the wood over here, you can see where there's little dips and dents in the wood, and actually these all become part of the print. So I like the fact that it's not totally flat, because it allows me to create this feeling of atmosphere with the ink. There's a lot about sound with this, and the ink has to make a certain sound. That way you know it's perfect, and you can hear this little hiss sound. The paper is very thin. It's handmade in Japan. So it also has imperfections in it, which make it unique. So we want to make sure that we have all the wrinkles out of the paper and out of the blankets. Otherwise, you'd put a nice wrinkle right in the paper, and sometimes even in the wood block. There's quite a bit of pressure exerted on the paper and the wood. And there we go, we'll put it on the table. So this is getting nice and dark, just how I like it. We're starting to pick up a little bit of the grain in the wood here. And the reason I want these to be quite black is because I actually, when I'm finished printing the background, I then take a tool and I punch holes in the paper. So it's the forerunner of hand punching that I do, which creates this contrast between the really rich black and then the white that comes through the holes in the paper. This stencil is actually a chart that is from information on atmosphere and wind and ozone. I look at atmospheric data, and I'm interested in the graphics that describe some sort of condition. So I'm looking at this more for the quality of a drawing. I really like the way all the lines are kind of coming down. So I use that as a stencil or a template to punch holes in my paper. And before I start punching, I actually take a marker and draw on top of here, and I find some gesture that I like in the data, and then I start punching. So I have a variety of tools here that I use, and once I'm done, I constantly, while I'm doing this, as you can see, I can't see what I'm doing underneath, but I actually have to stop and look at my print and how it's starting to interface with the wood grain, with the view of a city below, because if I overpunch, there's no going back. So as I get closer to finishing one of these prints, I pull it off the wall and I put it on a white backdrop so I can see if I want to add any more lights in a certain area, any more lines in the atmosphere. And as you can see, the paper itself, it changes the closer you get it to a board. It looks like, there's a lot of lights on in the city. And that's what I like. It moves. It's never quite the same depending on the atmosphere. Art matters, so in one regard, you're not crazy. The world is not really as you see it. And art helps you understand that there's a lot of perceptual illusion out there on a formal level, and art gets underneath a lot of the surface. It just somehow makes everything much richer. These are just a few units of grass that I've grown in vacuum formed plastics, and I grow many, many of them so I can create an immersive environment or installation so that your field of vision really takes in a lot of these. So the object starts to lose its identity. The more that you see, the more you become engaged with the overall pattern and not the individual piece itself. I just came from, I had a month residency in Banff in Alberta, at the Banff Centre for the Arts in Alberta, Canada. And there were artists from all over the world there. And in conversation, you might talk about where you're from, and anytime I mention Detroit, hands down, every response is, oh, I really want to come to Detroit. I've heard so many things about Detroit. Whereas 10 years ago, you would travel and people would have, sympathetic words. Oh, you're from Detroit. It was almost like you had just buried somebody, where they would be sending condolences. And I never quite understood that because I think places that are not in the mainstream tend to be pretty interesting.